Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 31st of May, 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by David Scott. David, of course, reporting from north of the border with northern exposure. Exposure, a key word, Mike, I think.
Well, absolutely, because the Daily Express a few days ago wrote this article, "Wake up to stitch up over defence union warn experts." And it was actually a good article, David, because they used the right words.
They did indeed, and they used the right words, and they looked beyond the surface. They talked about European Defence Union. They didn't use the EU Army tag, which is so easily debunked. And they talked about the essentially a conspiracy by civil servants in the UK to sign Britain up for this, without it going through Parliament and without the British people being informed. So it was an excellent article.
Which is all very unfortunate, because if you go looking for that article today, we get this, a 404.
Yes, it was an excellent article. It's now gone, completely gone. No trace of it to be found on the internet. However did that happen?
Well, maybe they do. We're already running out of time here, but let's just move on a little bit to PESCO. And you contacted the European Commission or the European Union a couple of days ago on this issue.
Yes, this is more information that we've not been allowed to know about. I spotted a meeting that was held on the 29th of May, so just a couple of days ago, and the meeting had item 5 on the agenda, PESCO, third country participation, a draft council decision. Now, third country participation means the UK, because the only third country that matters is the UK. So that's all about our involvement in PESCO, and it's a draft council decision, but I couldn't find what the wording of the draft council decision was. So I asked the press office, and the response was, "Dear David, the decision on this specific matter has yet to be adopted by the Council. When it will be the case, we will issue a press release and the text of the decision will become public." So that's it. We're not allowed to know until after the decision is made. Then we'll be told.
So we can't have any influence on what that decision might be?
None whatsoever, it would seem.
Good stuff. That's what we've come to love about the European Union, isn't it? Yes, Brian.
Well, actually, this I think this one comes under David.
Oh, it does come under David,
and
yes.
The amusing thing is that we've both picked up on the great importance of Elton John, because Elton John's opinion on Brexit is paramount, as we're about to see.
Yes. What were your thoughts on this, David?
Well, I got onto this thanks to Daniel Radcliffe of the European Parliament Embassy in the UK, because he was retweeting an interview with Elton John where he was saying that the British people just didn't understand what they were voting for. They were just confused and they weren't able to cope. And so it was all a big mistake. And here we have David Lammy tweeting again about Elton John and saying that that basically the English is stupid. So the English are stupid and they didn't know what they were voting for. And he's a European. Elton John's a European, and not one of these nasty, narrow-minded, imperialistic, backward. Yeah. Yes, English. So here we see, it's very interesting to see what you've got here. It's disgust. It's contempt for your own people. In this case, the English. He's treating them, he views them with complete derision. Okay, so that's how the elite are viewing the people. It's important to note. And then Lammy also, if we can just very quickly go back to the other Lammy quote. Lammy's talking about what it is to be English, and he's saying we can't define English by DNA, so we can't have any sort of family relationship and being born into a nation and being part of something based on blood. Well, no, that's bad. We must have it based on ideas. This is civic nationalism. Now, we know all about this in Scotland. What this means is your membership of the country depends on you adopting a certain set of beliefs. It's totalitarian. That's what he's saying. You must believe what I tell you to believe, otherwise you're not English anymore.
Yes.
Well, let's bring him on, because this is the man that the whole nation should be paying attention to. I actually find this man disgusting, but the Mail picked up here. I'm sick to death of Brexit. So there's the Mail repeating the stupid colonial imperialistic English idiots. That's what you are if you dare to challenge the European Union, particularly on their censorship of EU Defence Union. But I thought the best quote from Elton was, "Brexit is a bowl of cereal that makes you throw up after eating." So this was clearly a very impressive article by the Daily Mail. I thought one of their junior students might have written it, but that was not the case because it was David Wilcock, their Whitehall correspondent. So we're really now seeing the intellectual power of the Daily Mail, which is diving faster than an F-35. And here's David Wilcock himself, political reporter, writing fast, tweeting slowly. Direct messages open for tips, bitching and abuse. This is very mature stuff. Interesting pose. I'm not sure what the single eye is about. So there's this bowl of cereal. I just picked out a few of his tweets. I like this one. "Burn this country, burn it to the ground." Wow. I found that pretty offensive. And David Wilcock, "Can't be arsed with this debate wars shite again." Apologies for my language, but this is the language that the Daily Mail's Whitehall correspondent produces. So there we are. We've lost another national newspaper. It's clearly incapable of producing anything worthwhile, analytical or intellectual. But we should pay attention to Elton John not.
We've mentioned this story a few times over the last year or two. This is the F-35. We've captioned it "What a Turkey" for many reasons. But of course, the big issue that the big sort of elephant in the room is the question of the relationship, the F-35's relationship to Turkey. And particularly because Turkey is determined to buy one of or several of these, which are S400s. So they're planning to take delivery of those in July. And this is really getting some people very upset, not least the Assistant Secretary of Defence, Catherine Wheelbarger, who was speaking at the Atlantic Council yesterday and said completion of this transaction for the S400s would be devastating not only to the F-35 programme on which the West has placed its modernised integrated air capacity, but it would potentially rupture Turkish interoperability with NATO. So they are taking this extremely seriously. Now, why is this a problem for the UK? Well, of course, we have bought a whole bunch of these turkeys, and some of them are flying and some of them aren't. But the point is, the engines in the F-35 are the Pratt & Whitney F135s, and they are built by Kiel, Pratt & Whitney, and unfortunately Kiel is 51% of this deal, and Kiel is a Turkish company, and they're made in Turkey. And not only are they made in Turkey, but according to the deal that's been done with this multinational conglomeration, Turkey is responsible for maintaining and upgrading the engines in the future. So Britain is left in the situation, as is the United States, that they've got these aircraft. They seem to be extremely high maintenance up until now. I'm not sure what in most of the criticism that I've seen of the F-35s, there hasn't been too much about the engines themselves, so perhaps they're reasonable capability, but nonetheless, there is going to be maintenance have to be done. But it's looking like the country and the company that is responsible for that maintenance isn't going to get the chance because Turkey is determined to buy S400s. So one other organisation has sort of raised this in the last couple of days. This is the national interest. Could one of America's allies take down the F-35 program? And it's a very interesting read, so I do recommend people go and have a look at it. Where does this leave us, Brian?
Well, it's an orchestrated shambles is where it leaves us, because of course this whole program has been engineered. When Miss Wheelbarger used the expression integrated air defence for the West, this is the agenda to use one massive company to try and bring together the air defence of all these nation states. This is globalism at work. And it's backfired in their faces because Turkey's realised that the Russians are offering an extremely good missile system and they want it. Whereas what are we seeing about the F-35? I'm afraid to say many people are saying it's a piece of junk. And are we as a nation state now dependent on Turkey to maintain our air force? It's I'm lost for words, really. It's outrageous.
Yes, David, very, very briefly on this one, because if we go back to what the EU, I can't remember the name of the office, was talking about the Express article. Of course, one of the things they were talking about was procurement, and what we're seeing at an EU level is this type of multinational sort of Airbus-style development and procurement process, which leaves us open to this type of problem.
Yes, and the problems are deep in the political, because we have Turkey now moving away from the West and towards the Islamic world quite strongly. We have the EU integration process, which was meant to include Turkey, stalled on that front, although moving forward very quickly in the Western Balkans. So we have a different political map emerging of different empires. And the F-35 program is one of many things that no longer makes any sense.
Okay, well, let's bring this organisation on screen then. Oxford Research Group, we've had them on screen before in recent weeks. Breaking the cycle of violence is what they're all about, apparently, but this is a defence think tank, and they have decided to publish an article, a paper on planning for the next war, making the case for remote warfare. So they want to make the case for remote warfare, Brian. So they say, well, here's one of the things they say. To illustrate, let's take the topic of risk, because remote warfare allows governments to engage abroad without consulting Parliament. It can be an attractive option for risk-averse governments who fear losing a vote. So this is quite an incredible statement, and this is really the basis of the whole thing. They are encouraging the use of remote warfare because it basically takes any handcuffs off that Parliament may, or the government may have, as a result of a vote in Parliament. That's quite an incredible position to be taking, and quite a policy to be recommending.
Jaw is on the floor over this one, Mike, because to have an organisation blatantly campaigning for remote warfare, which is not in control of Parliament and therefore not in control of the public, this is pushing for mercenary type armed forces, isn't it?
David, briefly.
It's astonishing, absolutely astonishing. And we're seeing also that everything is warfare. We're seeing press release this week from the EU where everything, private sector, formats like Facebook are all part of hybrid warfare. So everything's warfare, and there doesn't seem to be any control via parliaments anymore.
Absolutely. Now, if you like what the UK column does and you'd like to support us, you can do that by heading over to the community website and taking out a membership there. So that's ukcolumn.org/community, and your help would be much appreciated.
Indeed. And thank you very much to the viewer who sent through this article this morning. Telegraph, French police to face charges over yellow vest injuries. Now, this was prompted by the fact that we've had the French lady lawyer who's been talking about the yellow vest, Georgia Poulican. We've interviewed her. We're actually working with her at the moment. And of course, she's been talking about the terrible injuries that French demonstrators have suffered due to the excessive brutality of the French police. But the Telegraph carried something here. I wasn't able to get the full article due to the firewall. So I did have a look elsewhere. This is the World, French police to face charges over yellow vest violence. There are some other articles online. France 24 here, yellow vest protests, French government replaces Paris police chief after weekend of violence. But if you go through all of these articles, what they're not telling you about is the scale of violence against the demonstrators. And it took this very brave lady, here she is, Georgia Poulican, to actually speak out. Now, she's been running a video blog online for a great many months, getting huge numbers of views because she's commenting with a very professional commentary, a legal commentary on what the police are doing. And the police are clearly breaking the law. Some of their actions just quite incredible. In this picture, the man in the wheelchair gets sprayed in the face with probably CS gas in a canister. I could have put up a lot worse, but it just shows the attitude of the police. Now, the interview that we've done, which is up on UK column web page. We're over 19,000 views. If you haven't seen it, we encourage you to do it. Let's have a look at how the reporting's been going. So this is Remy Hates, who's the Paris public prosecutor. He said, "I want to be clear, there's no desire on my part to downplay this violence or to minimise it. There have been more than 170 cases of police violence reviewed, with 57 of them completed and awaiting a decision whether to prosecute." He then raised the specific case of Jerome Rodriguez, who lost an eye in March 26 demonstration, and another of an incident in a Burger King outlet in December where police fired rubber bullets. So
inside the Burger King?
Not sure on that, Mike. I focused on the fact we just mentioned one person who's lost an eye. Let's carry on with the report. He said, I want to be clear, there's no desire on my part to downplay this violence or minimise it. But he ends by saying, for the moment, no police were being investigated. Now, think about what this man has said. This is the reality that it's taken Georgia Pulican and other people to highlight. 2,448 people injured, 24 lost an eye. We're not talking about one man losing an eye, we're talking about 24, because this is targeted shots by the police. 5 have had their hands blown off, 12,000 arrests, nearly 11,000 people held in police custody, nearly 2,000 convictions, and over 300 people in prison. And the point that Georgia has been making is most of those people in prison, their relatives and friends don't know where they are. Picture on the right for me says it all. Just the brutality of those thugs, and they are thugs in their protective uniform, stepping over that injured lady who was bleeding on the road. We're going to say, please help us to support Georgia Pulican. She's come over to England because it is getting extremely dangerous for people challenging Macron's government. So this is the article under the video on UK Column. And I just want to highlight that there's a GoFundMe page indicated here. This is the current state, £936. I looked at this morning, but Georgia totally dependent on our generosity to stay safe in England and get the truth out about what's happening in France. And as she says in a very quiet way in the video, why do I need to tell you this? Because it could happen to you too. So very serious stuff.
David, we mentioned this article on the UK Column earlier in the week, GcMAF and the persecution of David Noakes, Lynn Thayer and Immunobiotech. Now, David Noakes was again on Humanity versus Insanity last night. You can find that on Ian R. Crane's YouTube channel. But one of the things that came up during that conversation is that David Noakes and Lynn Thayer have been engaging with the Common Law Court.
Yes, and we have here a note from the Common Law Court to confirm that a lawfully convened Common Law Court convened Monday, 27th of May, and at this hearing, the extradition order was annulled by a jury of reasonably minded peers. John Smith, having obtained the power of attorney for Linda, has also obtained ownership of the legal fiction Linda Thayer. Linda exists as a living woman and has established this fact by recording her birth with the Common Law Court. Accordingly, the statutory courts do not have authority over or personal jurisdiction over her, as they can only deal with a personal legal fiction. In relation to the legal fiction referred to in the extradition order, this is now owned by John Smith and is not attached to the living woman, and as a result, the extradition order cannot be used against her. A lawful challenge has been forwarded to the High Court today, challenging both the authority and jurisdiction of the Statute Court and the Crown. Until such times as this dispute is resolved, it would be unlawful under common law to try and enforce the extradition order against a living woman. So that's ongoing, and my understanding is that there's going to be an attempt by the state for that extradition to happen this weekend.
That's, I believe, going to be the case. Now, brief reminder that if you want to get hold of DVDs from the recent AV10 event, in our Crane's recent AV10 event, those are available from the UK Column website. The URL's there. Do get a copy, a box if you would like to. Now, Julian Assange. This is the Bournemouth and Elstree Times. Julian Assange in court no-show after being moved to prison's medical ward. So they say that WikiLeaks has grave concerns about Julian Assange after he was moved to a medical ward in the prison. He had been expected to appear at Westminster Magistrates Court via video link from Belmarsh Prison, well, the magistrate basically said he's not very well, so he won't be attending, and that court case has been rescheduled to June the 12th. And the magistrate was suggesting that court case would now happen inside Belmarsh Prison itself. Now, the British government getting pretty upset about some of the commentary on this, not least from this man, Niels Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture. And he said, I condemn in the strongest terms the deliberate, concerted, sustained nature of the abuse inflicted on Mr. Assange. He's been deliberately exposed, he said, for a period of several years to progressively severe forms of cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment and punishment, the cumulative effects of which can only be described as psychological torture. By displaying an attitude of complacency at best and complicity at worst, these governments, that's Britain and Ecuador, have created an atmosphere of impunity, encouraging Mr. Assange's uninhibited vilification and abuse. So, well, the British government not too happy with that, with Jeremy Hunt, the prospective Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister, saying this is wrong. Assange chose to hide in the embassy and was always free to leave and face justice. The UN Special Rapporteur should allow British courts to make their judgments without his interference or inflammatory accusations. And David, I've got to say, should the Special Rapporteur, even people may criticise the United Nations, but should the Special Rapporteur not call out the British government, the British establishment and the British judicial system if what they're doing is simply wrong? Is that not allowed anymore?
Indeed, that is his role, is it not? Here we see the way it's done. The justice is defined as what our courts do. So what our courts do, being justice by definition, must be right. However cruel, however much it is torture, however much it is manifestly unreasonable and unfair, it remains justice in the eyes of the government, and they cannot see any crime or any sin or any hounding of individual people because they're blinded by this word. But the word justice means something, and it does not mean the process that is currently happening in our courts.
Absolutely.
I'll just add to that, if I may, hypocrisy, isn't it, by the British government, lords it over any other small country in the world that we feel should be told how to run their affairs. But my goodness, we don't like it when somebody points a finger at us.
Now, the BBC yesterday had me in stitches, Brian, because, well, they were advertising for EE because EE has launched the first 5G network in London. Well, the BBC made a huge deal of this on every news programme that they had going. They had 2 or 3 articles on the BBC website, and this was one of them, 5G: EE launches UK's next generation mobile network. It was absolutely a sales pitch for EE, and I presume that they're going to offer the same amount of space and time to all the other mobile networks and operators that are going to be providing 5G connectivity in the coming weeks and months. But at the bottom of this article, they had a section from BBC Reality Check. Now, if anybody doesn't know, Reality Check is the BBC's fact-checking group. So it's got several people there that check the facts. And so these are the facts that they checked on 5G. And this is what they said. Some people have questioned whether there are health risks from 5G, but experts and regulators say there is no evidence of danger. Brilliant. Similar fears were expressed around earlier mobile internet and Wi-Fi. More than 200 scientists appealed to the EU to halt the rollout of 5G, saying that electromagnetic fields may be harmful to humans and the environment and could increase cancer risks. And they go on to say, but the EU says exposure from 5G will be far below limits set by the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. 5G technology is new, but experts believe it poses no greater risk than earlier mobile systems. So this is the statement from BBC Reality Check. They've clearly checked the facts, and that's what they've presented. Of course, they do acknowledge that some scientists are suggesting that there's increased cancer risk. But of course, elsewhere, the BBC has, over the last couple of years, been telling us, Brian, that we are subject to increased cancer risk, and within the next few years, 50% of us will die from cancer. But at no point has the BBC actually tried to work out, is there any correlation or relationship between mobile networks and the rise in cancer? But I just wanted to also highlight the first comment that was under this when I took the information earlier on, and it was this. And they quote what a reality check says here. They quote them by saying 5G technology is new, but experts believe it poses no greater risk than earlier mobile systems. This is incorrect, says the comment. It should read 5G technology is new, and some experts believe it poses no greater risk than earlier mobile systems. Many independent experts believe it's physiologically, it should be physiologically very harmful. So when you look down through the comments, the comments were overwhelmingly negative towards the rollout of 5G. And David, I've asked this question before, but I'm interested in your thoughts on this, because the British government, Western governments, are very keen to use the precautionary principle when it suits them. But in this case, we don't need to take any precautions or be careful about the rollout of this. Just get it out, because of course there's a defence and intelligence justification for it, a need for it from their point of view, and it doesn't really matter what health impacts there might be for the plebs.
This is the case, and you see the same things with vaccines as well. When you look for the studies that prove they're safe and effective, you find that they're not there, and that essentially rolling them out to the population at large is the study. I'm just checking here. World Health Organization, International Agency for Research on Cancer, classified radiofrequency radiation as a potential 2B carcinogen. So there are certainly concerns. The concerns are legitimate, and the concerns are being put forward by people who have a fair degree of expert knowledge in the field, but not, it would appear, in the wonderful world of the BBC, where the spotless mind finds nothing to worry about.
Absolutely. Now, one of the wonderful Tory leadership candidates, of course, is Florence of Arabia herself. That's Rory Stewart. And here she is. She was glad-handing in London yesterday, apparently. But the Independent here has it that Rory Stewart, Tory leadership contender, unveils proposal to break Brexit deadlock. So could you imagine what his brilliant proposal would be?
I'd really dread to think, actually, Mike. For a variety of reasons.
Well, it's a citizens' assembly. He's going to create a citizens' assembly if he becomes leader to thrash out a Brexit compromise, and the Archbishop of Canterbury is going to mediate that. So he's going to have people as diverse as European Research Group hardliner Mark Francis, Unite boss Len McCluskey, and, if necessary, Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage.
I'll just say for our audience that, of course, David Scott's been off camera, but he's slumped on his desk as you've been reading that.
Yes, indeed. So my question is to you both. What progress could possibly be made if you get that bunch in a room together? That seems to me just going to be another 6 months of argument, or 6 years of arguments potentially. So my question then was, what has Rory Stewart been smoking? And it turns out that in the Times today we can find out, because apparently he's been smoking opium in Iran. He said that it was a very stupid mistake, and he's very sorry about it indeed. But nonetheless, when he was in Iran, I think this was when he was on his world tour, where he got the moniker Florence of Arabia, he decided that he should have a good smoke at some opium, but he said it didn't have any effect on him because he was on a walking trip and covered as much as 30 miles each day.
Isn't Iran an extremely dangerous country at the moment that we're nearly at war with? Is he going to be questioned about who he met and what he was doing while he was smoking opium in Iran?
It's a pity they didn't arrest him. Now, David, what are your thoughts on this?
It's remarkable. Now, here we have a Bilderberg-endorsed man, and I see that the only Conservative MP invited to Bilderberg this year is endorsing Rory Stewart himself for the premiership of the country. He was on the BBC last night, announcing that apparently all we need is love. That's the new Conservative policy. And he is he is oh dear me, he's actually endorsing the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon's policy for how you actually persuade the Scots to vote for something they don't want to vote for. Is citizens' assemblies. It's the same policy. He's gone up. He said to Nippy, you know, you've got these Scots. You know, the problem with Scotland is it's full of Scots, and you know, I feel your pain. And what are you doing? Well, we're going to have citizens' assemblies, and we're going to, you know, tie them up in that while we import voters and change the demographics and force this through. Oh, that's a good idea. Let's do that. It's just outrageous. At least they're both singing from the same script. I wonder where it comes from.
The script is Big Society. I'll give you that straight away, because people think David Cameron's Big Society has long disappeared. But on the contrary, it's being built by the day. This is what Big Society is. It's basically a dictatorship wrapped up as communitarianism. That's why Common Purpose, the political charity, was pumping it through. And this is why we can see a continuous policy, whether it's in Wales or England or Scotland. So Big Society, people really need to look at it and see what's being done. And I'll just say that we're all laughing because we're having great difficulty describing the news in UK on this Friday. So for our overseas viewers, we are witnessing total breakdown politically in UK, madness descending on the country. And this is calculated, this is made. Very, very dangerous situation, I think, even though we're smiling.
David, okay, let's move on to Scotland and the Celtic story.
Yes, now the first slide here, these are two of the people convicted. So there's been 4 people convicted from Celtic Boys Club, or associated with Celtic Football Club, over a paedophile gang, which was involved in abusing and raping the boys and has caused huge harm and huge suffering to a great many. So you see 2 of the people here. There's been 4 convictions, but we're starting to hear that 14 names were reported to the police back in the 90s. So there is much more to come out. And there are many, many people who have been harmed and have not yet gone public with this. Now, if we just run forward in the slides, there we see the next 2. These are another 2 of the people who were convicted. But
not imprisoned.
But not imprisoned. But the position of Celtic has been, well, the Boys Club is a separate entity and nothing to do with us, so we're not liable. So that is a narrative we've been looking at, and it's continuing to collapse. There's some excellent work this week done by the Times. They did an investigation into it, and they revealed many additional links between Celtic and Celtic Boys Club, and this makes the claim that there's no link and there's no liability look even more threadbare. So we have here information revealed by the Times. David Hay, the Celtic manager, described the Boys Club very much part of Celtic FC, and the columnist in the official paper spoke of an official connection. Celtic's board members were committed to investment and support, and they also had links to Saville, and who's a Celtic supporter coming to the club. So many things which highlight the concern over the boys and their safety. On to the next slide, if you can, Mike. So there's been several quotes here that have undermined the official story that there's no link. Quote, it was 20 short years back that Jock Stein and Sir Robert Kelly brought the Celtic Boys Club into the Celtic family. It is now 18 years since Jock and John Higgins made the connection official. The Celtic View, 1987. But we're now being told, oh, there's no connection, there's nothing to see here. David Hayes' remarks welcomed ex-Celtic Boys Club players now playing with professional clubs. He said it brought great credit to the family name of Celtic that they should maintain the association with the Boys Club. He complimented the Celtic Boys Club and once again confirmed that they are very much part of Celtic FC. So here you see again and again the very top people within Celtic were saying the Boys Club is part of Celtic FC. Celtic FC's position is they're not linked and there's no liability. That is a narrative that's coming hugely under pressure. You see here the Sun reporting the same issue. The it quotes again the line that Celtic Boys Club are very much part of Celtic FC. And here you see Patrick Maguire. He says the new evidence reduces to ridicule its suggestions that Celtic and Celtic Boys Club are separate. And then we're seeing this is now a response to public pressure on platforms like Twitter and Facebook, and letter writing and people talking to the MPs. So we're seeing MPs finally coming on board and pushing on this. This is Adam Tompkins, former lecturer in law at Glasgow University, now a Conservative MSP. He's on record here talking about the abuse of children is horrific and affected many areas of society, including a number of football clubs. Questions need to be urgently addressed by the SFA and others as to whether anything like this is like enough has been done in Scotland to offer help. So he's pushing for more to be done, and also a Celtic supporting MSP called James Dornan, an MSP for the Glasgow constituency. He wrote a very strongly worded letter to the chief executive of Celtic. He says, "It's with great sadness I feel compelled to have to write this letter. I've been a Celtic supporter for 60 years, as was my dad before me and his dad before him. I remember being brought up to believe that Celtic stood for something more than just football, created to feed the poor, the club of the dispossessed, and the club with a heart." Well, I'm sure I'm not alone in wondering whatever happened to that Celtic FC, as we see no sign of a caring club in the way the aftermath of the scandal of the apparently endemic sexual abuse over the last 4 decades at Celtic Boys Club has been handled. So this is the sort of pressure that's coming on Celtic. We will see what happens next.
Well, I mean, what is the prospect that there will actually be convictions come out of all this? Is that down to the amount of public pressure that builds?
Well, the conviction side of things is somewhat separate, because you're going through the police and you're going through the Crown Office, and also some of the perpetrators may well be deceased. But you're also talking about compensation for the victims, and the fact that Celtic are refusing to countenance this at the moment is the main area of pressure. The potential for more convictions, well, there were more abusers, we're pretty sure of that. There'll be many more victims, but it depends who comes along, and what the police and the Crown Office does with the information if it's provided.
Undoubtedly, this is an issue being addressed by the official inquiry in Scotland, then.
Oh, the official inquiry has officially ruled out football as any part of its remit. The official inquiry is not looking at football. They've in fact punted the whole thing to the Football Association, well known for being able to carry out judicial operations. And the Football Association are looking at the football issues for sexual abuse. The official inquiry is not officially involved.
David, if I may just prompt you, I believe that you had some conversation with the inquiry, and one of the things that you asked was what they can actually do for abuse survivors who give a testimony to them.
Yes, the issue here is the official inquiry into child sexual abuse in Scotland, which has been run by the government, where everyone running it resigned because it was being pressured by government officials and government ministers, and they couldn't see any way of being independent. And then it was reconstituted under Lady Smith. Is now proceeding. But what they're doing is they're viewing this as a public inquiry. They're going to issue reports. They're going to reveal information to the public in general terms. They're going to conduct and publish case studies. They're not gathering information in any judicial manner, and they're not establishing truth or innocence or guilt at all. So they will pass information on to the police to investigate, but there's no. It's not like the inquiry in Australia, which was the Royal Commission, where people had to give evidence under oath and things like this. That's not happening. It's much more in terms of we will learn lessons for the future type inquiry.
Okay, thank you for that. And if we can just end on this one, thank you very much to the person who sent this through to us. This is from a French blog, so it is only a blog effectively. But the question there in French is, do we need to ban heterosexuality? So we're getting an impression of where things go next. and why the public really needs to wake up to the government's and the European Union's agenda on sexuality. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. And just a reminder that if you can feel you can donate to Georgia Pulican's appeal, that will be very gratefully received, because she is now dependent on the generosity of people, particularly here in England, to keep her safe and allow her to keep reporting. That's it for today. We will be back at the same time on Monday. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.